One slash aimed at me, and I block it by instinct. Turns out it's a ritual test. What's even crazier? Now, I'm bound to their queen, and I'm stuck on a hostile planet, surrounded by warriors. Never thought I'd end up here, but here we are. Welcome to the Alien Whispers. If this caught your attention, like and subscribe, and let's get started. Kieran Voss adjusted the sleek, silver-trimmed collar of his diplomatic uniform as the transport shuttle descended through the shimmering atmosphere of Maraxis. Beyond the viewport, the planet unfurled like a dream forged in fire and water. An endless expanse of plasma oceans, their molten surfaces swirling in hues of violet and gold, cradling floating cities that gleamed with bioorganic architecture. The Homo sapiens Union, HSU, had sent him here to secure an alliance with the Maraxis, a warrior race whose mastery of biotechnology made them invaluable against the encroaching Zorth Dominion. 3 years behind a desk at the diplomatic corps had not prepared him for this. His first field assignment, and it had to be a world where strength was law and words were wind. The shuttle touched down with a soft hiss on a landing platform suspended above the plasma tides. Kieran stepped out, his boots clicking against the smooth, living metal of the surface, and took a deep breath of the charged air. It smelled of ozone and something faintly sweet, like the aftermath of a storm. Beside him, his attaché, Lena Carter, murmured last-minute advice. Keep your posture firm, but respectful. The Maraxi value presence. And don't flinch, ever. Kieran nodded, wiping his palms against his trousers. His briefing had been frustratingly vague. The newly crowned Queen Marika Thalor was direct, fierce, and ruled a people who revered combat above all else. Nothing about how to navigate their customs beyond that. A resonant hum vibrated through the platform as massive doors of woven biometal parted, revealing the throne hall of the Maraxi capital. The chamber stretched vast and luminous before him, its walls pulsing faintly with veins of plasma light that cast shifting patterns across the floor. Curved blades and intricate tapestries of battle adorned the space, each telling a story of blood and triumph. At the far end, atop a dais of living coral, stood Queen Marika Thalor, her presence a storm contained in flesh. Kieran's breath caught as she stepped forward. She moved with the lethal grace of a predator, her lithe form clad in ceremonial armor that hugged her curves like a second skin, its surface shimmering with embedded plasma threads. Her hair, a cascade of midnight black streaked with silver, flowed down her back, framing a face both regal and wild. Violet eyes glowed with an inner fire, and atop her head perched delicate, pointed ears, reminiscent of some ancient feline, twitching slightly as she assessed the newcomers. Elaborate bioluminescent markings traced her high cheekbones, glowing faintly, a testament to her royal lineage. A deep, thrumming horn sounded, shaking Kieran to his core, as a herald's voice boomed through the hall. Her Royal Majesty, Queen Marika Thalor, sovereign of the plasma seas, unbroken blade of the Maraxi. The court stilled, every eye turning to the human delegation. Ambassador Elias Holt, the senior diplomat, stepped forward with practiced ease. Your Majesty, I present Kieran Voss and Lena Carter, newly appointed attaches of the HSU. They are here to aid in our negotiations for a mutual defense pact against the Zorth Dominion. Marika descended the dais, her steps deliberate, an older Maraxi male trailing behind her. His graying hair and stern features marked him as Vraxis Core, her chief advisor, his own facial markings simpler but no less commanding. I am Vraxis Core, counsel to Her Majesty, he said, his voice dripping with disdain as he eyed Kieran. You arrive at a pivotal moment for our people, humans. Do not waste it. Marika silenced him with a subtle flick of her hand and stopped before Kieran, her violet gaze piercing through him like a blade seeking weakness. Thou art the new diplomat, she said, her voice clear and commanding, carrying an accent that turned his name into something exotic. Thou hast the stance of one who knows battle. Kieran straightened, meeting her eyes despite the knot in his stomach. Only basic training, Your Majesty. My expertise lies in negotiation, not combat. A faint smile curved her lips, sharp and enigmatic. We shall see. Without warning, she moved, a blur of motion, her arm lashing out in a ceremonial strike aimed at his shoulder. It was a test, a ritual, though Kieran didn't know it. Instinct kicked in, honed by countless hours in the HSU's virtual combat simulators. He pivoted, raising his forearm to deflect her strike in a simple, fluid block. The throne hall fell silent, the air thick with shock. Marika's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as she froze mid-motion. Around them, Maraxi guards and courtiers erupted into murmurs that grew into heated exchanges, their voices echoing off the biometal walls. Kieran held his position, glancing at Ambassador Holt, whose face had drained of color. What just happened? Kieran whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising din. Maraxis stepped forward, his expression thunderous. This human has answered the royal trial. It is unprecedented, an outrage. Silence. Marika's voice cut through the chaos like a plasma blade, sharp and unyielding. She hadn't moved from her stance, her eyes still locked with Kieran's. The trial was offered and met, as our ancient laws decree. There is no dispute. She straightened, addressing the court with regal authority. The human, Kieran Voss, has proven himself worthy through combat. By the edicts of our ancestors, we are now soul-bound. Soul-bound. Kieran's voice cracked, his mind racing. I don't understand. Ambassador Holt gripped his arm, his diplomatic smile tight. You've just become Maraxi royalty, Mr. Voss. Congratulations on your elevation. Marika's gaze shifted, a calculating mask settling over her features, though beneath it, Kieran swore he saw a flicker of intrigue, or perhaps curiosity. Take him to the royal quarters, she commanded, her tone brooking no argument. We have much to discuss, my consort. As guards moved to escort him, Kieran's head spun. The weight of her words sank in, each step toward the unknown pulling him deeper into a destiny he hadn't meant to claim. The plasma oceans beyond the hall churned, their glow reflecting the storm now brewing within him. Kieran Voss paced the expansive chamber that now served as his quarters, his boots sinking slightly into the warm, living floor of the Maraxi royal palace. The room was a marvel of bioorganic design, walls that pulsed faintly with veins of plasma light, a ceiling that mimicked the swirling violet gold of the oceans below, and a wide balcony overlooking the endless expanse of the plasma seas. The air carried that same ozone-sweet scent he'd noticed upon arrival, but now it felt heavier, laced with the weight of his new reality. Less than a day had passed since his accidental triumph in the throne hall, and already the title of consort clung to him like the ceremonial armor he'd yet to wear. He ran a hand through his dark hair, still processing the whirlwind of events. The royal trial, an ancient Maraxi ritual he'd stumbled into, had bound him to Queen Marika Thalor, a warrior queen whose violet eyes and commanding presence lingered in his mind. Ambassador Holt had promised a full briefing soon, but for now, Kieran was alone, save for the occasional silent Maraxi attendant who drifted in and out like shadows. One had left a folded pile of deep indigo garments on a coral-carved table, their surface shimmering with plasma threads. Her Majesty requests you dress appropriately for your training, the attendant had said before departing with a bow that felt more formal than welcoming. Training. The word echoed in his thoughts as he reluctantly shed his HSU uniform and donned the Maraxi attire. The fabric was impossibly light, molding to his frame with a warmth that suggested it was alive, yet it left him feeling exposed, a diplomat playing at being a warrior. He was still adjusting the snug tunic when the chamber doors slid open without warning. Well, you've certainly landed yourself in deep plasma, Lena Carter said, striding in with her usual brisk efficiency. Her diplomatic uniform remained pristine, a stark contrast to the alien garb Kieran now wore. The embassy's buzzing about your little stunt yesterday. Kieran tugged at the tunic's hem, frowning. It wasn't a stunt, Lena. I didn't mean to block her strike. It just happened. And now you're soul-bound to a queen who could cut you in half without blinking, she replied, perching on the edge of a biometal bench. Holt's thrilled, though. He thinks this could give us leverage in the negotiations. Before Kieran could respond, a shadow filled the doorway. Queen Marika Thalor entered, her presence as commanding as it had been in the throne hall, though her ceremonial armor had been replaced by a simpler training outfit. Fitted leather-like material interwoven with plasma filaments that accentuated her athletic form. Her midnight black hair was pulled into a tight braid, the silver streaks catching the light, and those feline ears atop her head twitched slightly as she took in the scene. "Leave us," she said to Lena, her voice a low command that brooked no argument. Lena offered a quick bow and slipped out, casting Kieran a glance that said good luck. Marika approached, her violet eyes assessing him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Thou art garbed as a Maraxi now," she noted, circling him slowly. "Yet thou still movest like a stranger in thy own skin." Kieran straightened, meeting her gaze. "I'm not used to this, your majesty. On Earth, we don't wear living clothes, or fight with blades for that matter." She stopped before him, close enough that he caught a faint scent of something sharp and metallic, like plasma after a storm. "Call me Marika when we are alone," she corrected, her tone softening just enough to hint at curiosity. "And thou wilt learn our ways, consort. A soul-bound must know how to stand beside me, not merely behind." She produced a slender, curved weapon from a sheath at her hip, a plasma blade, its edge glowing with a faint violet hum as it pulsed in her grip. "Take it," she said, holding it out to him. "Hold it as though thou meanest to survive." Kieran accepted the blade, its warmth seeping into his palm as he fumbled to mimic her stance. "I'm better with words than weapons," he said, offering a half-smile. "On Earth, we fight with diplomacy, talk our way out of trouble." Marika tilted her head, her ears flicking with interest. "Words," she echoed, stepping closer to adjust his grip with a firm, precise touch. "Words do not cut plasma or block a blade. But, tell me, human, how do thy people win with such fragile tools?" Her fingers lingered on his hand, steadying the blade, and Kieran felt a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with the weapon. He looked into her eyes, finding a spark of genuine intrigue beneath her warrior's mask. "By not giving up," he said, his voice steady despite his awkward grip. "By finding a path when there isn't one. Like I'm trying to do here with you." She paused, her hand still on his, her gaze searching his face as if weighing his words against some inner measure. "My father once said the truest survivor is not the strongest, but the one who never ceases to seek a way," she replied, her voice softening further, almost reflective. "Perhaps thou art not entirely useless, Kieran Voss." He chuckled, the sound breaking the tension between them. "Thanks for the compliment. I think." Marika withdrew her hand, stepping back to assume a fighting stance, the plasma blade humming in her grasp. "Enough talk," she said, though a faint curve touched her lips, a ghost of smile. "Show me what thou canst do." The training began in earnest, Marika guiding him through basic forms with a patience that surprised him. Her strikes were controlled, precise, each one a lesson rather than a threat, and Kieran stumbled through them, his diplomatic instincts warring with the physical demands of the blade. Sweat beaded on his brow as he parried a slow thrust, the plasma edge singing as it grazed the air near his shoulder. "Thou thinkest too much," she observed, lowering her weapon after a particularly clumsy block. "A warrior acts. A consort must at least appear capable." "I'm a diplomat, not a gladiator," Kieran replied, catching his breath. "But I'll get there, if only to keep up with you." Her violet eyes flickered with something. Amusement, perhaps, or the first stirrings of respect. "We shall see," she said, sheathing her blade. "Tomorrow, we train again. Rest now, consort. Thou wilt need thy strength." As she turned to leave, Kieran called after her. "Marika, why teach me yourself? You could have sent someone else." She paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. "Because thou art mine to shape," she said simply, "and I would know the one bound to me, not merely command him." The The doors closed behind her, leaving Kieran alone with the hum of the plasma blade still warm in his hand. Beyond the balcony, the plasma seas churned, their restless glow mirroring the unease and faint excitement stirring within him. He was a stranger here, yes, but Marika's words lingered, a thread of connection weaving between them, fragile yet undeniable. Unseen beyond the palace walls, Maraxis' core stood in a shadowed chamber, his fingers tracing the edge of a Zorith communicator. His lips curled into a sneer as he activated the device, his voice a low hiss. The human is a flaw in our plans. We moved sooner than anticipated. The plasma seas roared far above as Kieran Voss descended a spiraling stairway carved into the heart of Maraxis, each step resonating with the faint hum of the planet's living core. The air grew thick and humid, carrying the sharp tang of minerals and a hint of something ancient, herbal, almost sacred. After 2 days of training with Marika, his muscles ached from wielding the plasma blade, but her lessons lingered in his mind as much as his body. Her patience, her quiet curiosity about his human ways, and that fleeting smile when he'd parried her strike. They'd left him feeling less like an outsider and more like a man with something to prove. Now, she'd summoned him to this hidden place beneath the palace, a chamber she called the Heart of Resonance, for a ritual he barely understood. The stairway opened into a cavern aglow with ethereal light. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls, their surfaces pulsing with veins of plasma that cast shimmering reflections across a central pool of luminous blue water. Steam rose in delicate tendrils, curling around floating bioluminescent herbs that bobbed on the surface, their glow mingling with the cavern's radiance. Kieran paused at the threshold, his indigo Maraxi tunic clinging to his skin in the humid air, the plasma threads faintly warm against his chest. At the pool's edge stood Marika Thalor, her back to him as she arranged ceremonial items on a slab of living coral. A chalice, a small vial of glowing liquid, and a bioorganic crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. She turned at his approach, her feline ears twitching slightly, and Kieran's breath caught. Gone was the training leather. She wore a simple shift of white fabric, its edges embroidered with ancient Maraxi symbols that glowed faintly against her skin. The garment draped her form with a softness that contrasted her warrior's poise, her midnight black hair falling loose around her shoulders, silver streaks catching the light. Her violet eyes met his, steady yet tinged with something unguarded. Anticipation, perhaps. "Thou hast come," she said, her voice softer than he'd heard it, as if the cavern's sanctity tempered her usual command. "Did you doubt I would?" Kieran replied, stepping closer, his boots echoing faintly on the smooth stone floor. She hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "Maraxis hath whispered to thy ambassador, offering paths that would undo this bond. I wondered if thou mightst waver." Kieran shook his head, holding her gaze. "Holt wouldn't betray us, not without consulting me first. I'm here, Marika, for this whatever it is." Her lips curved faintly, a shadow of relief softening her regal mask. "The soul resonance," she explained, gesturing to the pool. "A rite older than our cities, binding those joined by the trial. It hath 3 phases: purification, communion, and commitment. We have but 4 hours before the court expects us above." She indicated a smaller pool to the side, its water shimmering with a deeper blue. "First, thou must cleanse thyself of outside influences. The minerals will prepare thee for what follows." Kieran glanced at the folded ceremonial garment waiting on a nearby bench, then back at her. "And my clothing?" he asked, sensing the weight of tradition in her silence. Her cheeks flushed faintly beneath her bioluminescent markings, though her voice remained steady. "The purification is undertaken without barriers, traditionally, but accommodations can be made for thy human customs." He held her gaze for a long moment, the air between them thickening with unspoken tension. After days of adapting to her world, half measures felt like a retreat. With a quiet resolve, he began shedding the indigo tunic, conscious of her eyes on him as he stripped down to nothing. She turned away to grant him privacy, but not before he caught a flicker of something. Curiosity, perhaps, in her expression. The warm water enveloped him as he stepped into the smaller pool, a tingling sensation spreading across his skin like static. He submerged completely, letting the minerals dissolve the tension of the past days, the glow seeping into his very pores. When he emerged, droplets trailing down his chest, Marika approached, now clad in a more elaborate version of her shift, its glowing symbols tracing the lines of her form. She offered him a chalice filled with a lilac liquid that shimmered like liquid plasma. "The communion phase," she said, her voice taking on a ritual cadence. "We share this essence from the sacred pools. It will deepen the bond, letting us feel what the other carries within." Kieran accepted the chalice, its warmth pulsing against his palm. "Is it safe for humans?" "I had our healers test it," she assured him, stepping closer. "It will affect thee differently, less a sharpening of senses, more an opening of the heart. No harm will come." He drank deeply, the liquid spreading a slow heat through his chest, heightening his awareness. The hum of the crystals, the steam's caress, and most vividly, Marika's presence. He passed the chalice back, and she completed her portion, her eyes darkening as the essence took hold. She led him to the main pool, where floating candles cast islands of light across the azure surface. "Now we enter together," she instructed, her voice low and steady despite their exertion. "As we share the sacred waters, so shall we share our strength, our challenges, our victories." They descended into the larger pool, the warm water lapping at their waists. Marika turned to face him, taking his hands in hers, her skin smooth and warm against his. In the ethereal light, her violet eyes glowed, and she spoke the formal words, "I offer my strength to thee." Then, softer, almost a whisper, she added, "Both as my consort and as my chosen." The distinction struck him, duty versus desire. Kieran tightened his grip on her hands, improvising what felt right. "I offer my loyalty to thee," he said, his voice firm, "both as my queen and as my chosen." Her expression shifted, surprise, then a quiet pleasure that softened her features. "The final phase requires physical communion," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the water's gentle ripple, "to bind our essences completely." She guided his hand to a bioorganic crystal embedded between her collarbones, its glow intensifying at his touch. "Place thy hand here," she said, her tone trance-like. "We must align our rhythms." Kieran pressed his palm against the crystal, feeling the steady thrum of her pulse beneath it. The light flared, illuminating the delicate curves beneath her damp shift. His fingers slipped slightly, brushing the sensitive skin just below the crystal's edge, a place no one dared touch. A jolt surged through them, their heartbeats syncing in a wild, unspoken dance, like waves of plasma crashing against the shore. Marika froze, her breath hitching, her violet eyes widening with a mix of shock and something deeper. "Thou just touched where none have ventured," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Dost thou know what that means?" Kieran swallowed, his hand still resting there, the heat of her skin searing into him. "I didn't mean to, Marika, but I feel your heartbeat. It's strong, like the oceans out there." She didn't pull away, instead tilting closer, her gaze piercing his. "And I feel thee," she whispered. "Not a warrior, but steadfast. Don't move thy hand yet. Let me know thee more." "If you want," he replied, his voice rough with the ritual's intensity. "I'll stay here longer than you think." The air grew heavy, charged with a current neither named. They stood in silence, the water flowing between them, until Marika stepped back, breaking the connection with a reluctant grace. "The rite is complete for now," she said, though her eyes lingered on him. "We must return soon." As they dressed in silence, Kieran's heightened senses caught a faint glint in the shadows. A small, metallic device half buried among the crystals, its design alien to Maraxi craft. His stomach tightened. "Marika," he said, keeping his voice low, "look at this." She joined him, her ears flattening as she recognized the Zorith insignia etched into its surface. "A spy's tool," she muttered, her tone hardening. "Someone watches us." The glow of the heart of resonance dimmed as suspicion crept in, but between them, something else had ignited, a bond forged not just by ritual, but by the first threads of trust. The grand ceremonial hall of the Maraxis palace shimmered with an otherworldly glow, its biometal walls alive with veins of plasma light that danced across the polished floor. Thousands of crystalline fixtures hung from the ceiling, casting prismatic patterns over the gathered crowd. Nobles in flowing robes of plasma-threaded silk, warriors in sleek bioarmor, and envoys from distant worlds, including the full HSU contingent. Kieran Voss stood at the hall's entrance, his heart pounding beneath the deep indigo ceremonial garb Marika had chosen for him. The tunic and trousers, embroidered with silver Maraxis symbols, fit him like a second skin, accentuating his human frame rather than hiding it. At his hip hung a plasma blade, its hilt concealing the transmitter Lena had smuggled to him, an insurance policy he hoped he wouldn't need. 3 days had passed since the soul resonance, and the memory of that humid cavern clung to him like the steam from the sacred pools. Marika's touch, her heartbeat beneath his fingers, the electric charge that had surged between them. It had shifted something fundamental. Her whispered words, her reluctant trust, had woven a thread of connection he couldn't shake. But the Zorith device they'd found had cast a shadow over it all, a silent warning that their bond was not the only force at play. Now, as he awaited the formal recognition of his role as consort, the air thrummed with anticipation and danger. Ambassador Holt approached, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. Lena made contact, he murmured, adjusting Kieran's collar as if fussing over details. She found evidence in Maraxis's quarters, encrypted messages, but couldn't extract it safely. "It's hidden in your blade's transmitter." Kieran nodded slightly, his fingers brushing the hilt. "Maraxis is here?" "With his supporters, near the throne," Holt replied, stepping back and raising his voice for any onlookers. "You represent Earth well, Consort Voss." Before Kieran could reply, ceremonial horns blasted through the hall, their deep resonance shaking the air. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floor, every eye tracking his progress. Whispers followed him, some curious, others laced with scorn. At the hall's far end, atop a dais of living coral, stood Marika Thalor, resplendent in ceremonial armor that gleamed with plasma filaments. Her midnight black hair was braided with silver and indigo threads that matched his attire, her bioluminescent markings accentuated with glowing pigment, making her violet eyes burn brighter. She was both queen and warrior, a vision of lethal grace. To her right stood Maraxis Core, his graying hair stark against his dark robes, flanked by several nobles whose expressions mirrored his cold disdain. As Kieran reached the dais, he knelt as Marika had instructed during their training, the plasma blade a steady weight at his side. Marika rose, her voice ringing clear through the hall. "Today, we affirm what the trial began. The sacred bond between ruler and consort, forged in combat, tempered in resonance, and now declared before all." She extended her hand, and Kieran took it, rising to stand beside her, her grip firm yet warm. "Doth any voice challenge this bond?" she asked, her eyes sweeping the crowd, daring dissent. The tension stretched taut, then snapped as Maraxis stepped forward, his movements smooth and deliberate. "I speak not in challenge, Majesty, but in concern for our traditions," he said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned orator. "The human consort prevailed by chance, not skill. Ere we bind Maraxis to this union, perchance a demonstration of his worthiness is in order." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the traditionalist factions, their eyes glinting with anticipation. Kieran felt Marika's hand tighten briefly on his before she released it, her regal composure unshaken. "What demonstration dost thou propose, advisor?" she asked, though the edge in her tone suggested she knew the answer. Maraxis gestured and a towering Maraxi warrior stepped from the crowd. Kieran, his nephew, a mountain of muscle-clad in bioarmor, his plasma blade already drawn. Scars crisscrossed his arms, a testament to a lifetime of combat. A simple test, Maraxis said, his smile thin. First blood drawn declares the victor. This is irregular. A voice interjected. Elder Cirrus, a wiry female with silver-streaked ears, her markings denoting high rank. The trial was met. Yet many question its legitimacy. Maraxis countered smoothly. A true display would silence doubts and bolster the queen's reign. Kieran's stomach twisted. It was a trap. Refusal would weaken Marika's authority. Acceptance might end in his blood on the floor. Before she could respond, he stepped forward, his voice steady despite the odds. I accept the demonstration. Surprise flickered across Maraxis's face, quickly masked by satisfaction. Excellent, he said, stepping back as attendants cleared a space at the hall's center. Marika's violet eyes met Kieran's, a silent question in their depths. He gave her a faint nod, then turned to face Kieran, drawing his plasma blade. The weapon hummed in his grip, the transmitter's subtle bump reassuring under his thumb. As Kieran assumed his stance, Kieran pressed it, activating whatever evidence Lena had secured. He could only hope it reached Holt in time. Begin, Maraxis commanded, his voice sharp. Kieran lunged, his blade a violet streak, and Kieran barely deflected it, the clash sending a jolt up his arm. The crowd gasped as he stumbled back, using the defensive forms Marika had drilled into him. Thou art already dead, human, Kieran growled, pressing forward with another strike. Thou simply knowest it not. Kieran retreated, his training barely keeping pace with Kieran's speed. A glancing blow sliced his forearm, a thin line of blood welling up, drawing appreciative murmurs from the onlookers. First blood to Kieran, Maraxis announced, triumph lacing his words. The test is done. No, Kieran said, steadying his stance, the sting sharpening his focus. He drew blood, but the challenge was worthiness, not a single strike. Frustration flashed across Kieran's face as the crowd murmured agreement. He attacked again, his strikes growing wilder, and Kieran dodged, using the hall's space to his advantage. Across the room, he saw Holt stiffen, a hand to his earpiece. Lena's transmission had landed. Kieran pressed him back toward the dais, and in a desperate move, Kieran rolled beneath a sweeping strike, springing up behind his opponent. With a twist of his wrist, he nicked Kieran's shoulder, a thin cut mirroring his own. Blood for blood, Kieran declared, stepping back, chest heaving. The demonstration is complete. Before Kieran could retort, Holt strode forward, his voice cutting through the rising chaos. The ceremony is halted. Advisor Maraxis, surrender thy weapons. Maraxis's face contorted with rage. What treachery is this? We have proof, Holt said coldly, holding up a data crystal. Encrypted messages to Zorth agents, plotting to assassinate Queen Marika and deliver Maraxi defenses to our enemies. The hall erupted, nobles shouting, warriors drawing blades. Kieran lunged, not at Kieran, but toward Marika, his plasma edge aimed for her heart. Kieran moved without thought, shoving her aside and taking the strike in his shoulder. Pain flared white-hot as the blade sank deep, and he staggered, blood soaking his tunic. Guards! Marika's voice sliced through the pandemonium as she caught him, her arms steadying his fall. Around them, the hall dissolved into combat. Loyal warriors clashing with Maraxis's rebels, plasma blades singing through the air. Stay with me, she commanded, her tone fierce as she drew her own blade, deflecting a strike meant for him. Her violet eyes blazed, her grip on him unyielding. Not planning to go anywhere, Kieran managed through gritted teeth, clutching his weapon with his good hand, guarding her flank. Together, they held their ground, the warrior queen and her human consort united in a storm of steel and plasma, their bond forged anew in the crucible of betrayal. Sunlight filtered through the translucent walls of the royal medical chamber, casting a warm, golden glow across the floating city beyond. The plasma seas shimmered in the distance, their violet gold waves calmer now, as if mirroring the fragile peace settling over Maraxis. Kieran Voss lay propped against a bioorganic bed, its surface pulsing faintly with regenerative energy. His shoulder throbbed beneath a lattice of healing patches, the wound from Quran's blade a dull ache rather than the searing pain of 3 days ago. The chaos of the ceremonial hall, the clash of plasma blades, Marika's fierce cry, the blood soaking his tunic, felt like a fever dream, yet the weight of her hand on his arm lingered, grounding him in the reality of what they'd survived. A Maraxi physician adjusted a monitor beside him, its crystalline display humming softly. "Thy human form responds well to our compounds," she observed, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Another day of rest, and thou wilt be fit for light duties." Kieran nodded, his gaze drifting to the chamber doors as they parted with a whisper of biometal. Marika Thalor entered, dismissing the physician and her trailing guards with a subtle gesture. She wore no ceremonial armor now, only practical leather interwoven with plasma threads, its simplicity accentuating her regal bearing. Her midnight black hair hung loose, silver streaks glinting in the light, and faint shadows beneath her violet eyes hinted at sleepless nights spent securing her throne. Yet as she approached, her posture softened, the warrior queen giving way to something more human, or perhaps more Maraxi in its unguarded depth. "Thy ambassador hath been relentless," she said, settling beside his bed, her voice carrying a trace of dry humor. "She demandeth to know when thou wilt be fit for a debriefing." Kieran managed a wry smile, shifting against the bed's warm surface. Earth Command's probably scrambling to figure out how a junior attaché ended up Maraxi royalty. Marika's lips twitched, a rare lightness breaking through her fatigue. "Commander Jara reporteth the last of Vraxis's conspirators are contained, 17 in total, counselors and warriors alike. The evidence thy colleague secured speaketh louder than their denials." "And Vraxis himself?" Kieran asked, noting the brief hardening of her expression. "Silent," she replied, her tone cooling. "But our ancient laws are clear on treason's price. That is for tomorrow. Today, my concern lieth elsewhere." Her hand rested lightly on his uninjured arm, a touch more intimate than any public gesture they'd shared, sending a quiet warmth through him. Their eyes met, and the air thickened with the unspoken weight of the past days, the soul resonance, the battle, the moment he'd taken a blade for her. "They're pushing Holt to leverage this," he said, breaking the silence. "To use my position for better terms in the pact." "And what sayest thou?" she asked, her fingers tightening slightly, as if bracing for his answer. "I told them the terms will be fair," he said firmly. "This isn't about leverage. It's about alliance, real alliance." Her shoulders relaxed, a flicker of relief softening her gaze. "Thy diplomacy hath proven its worth," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. A human consort amidst Maraxi blades. None foresaw this. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with possibilities neither had dared voice in the chaos. Marika broke it first, her tone shifting to something more formal, though her eyes betrayed her. "The council, what remaineth of it, debate our bond. Some argue the trial's intent was lacking, that we might set it aside without breaking tradition." Kieran kept his expression neutral, though her words stung more than he expected. "I see. And what do you argue?" She leaned closer, her violet eyes locking with his. "I have not spoken. I wish to hear thee first." He took a breath, her proximity stirring the same heat he'd felt in the sacred pools. 3 weeks ago, I was a diplomat chasing a career. Now I'm bound to a queen on a world I'm still learning to navigate. He reached for her hand, encouraged when she didn't pull away. "It's not the path I planned, but I don't want to leave it." Her fingers intertwined with his, a quiet strength in the gesture. "Even knowing the burdens it bringeth?" The skeptics who doubt a human can grasp our ways. "I understand enough," he said, his voice softening. "That strength isn't just in blades. That your people need a leader who honors tradition but isn't chained by it." He paused, then added, and that what started as necessity has become something neither of us saw coming. Marika's royal mask slipped, revealing a raw emotion that caught them both off guard. "When now it took Koran's strike," she said, her voice faltering, "no Maraxi would dare step before their queen. They would trust my blade alone. Thou didst not think, thou acted." "I didn't," he admitted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe that's what makes me different." She traced the line of his jaw with her free hand, her touch light yet electric. "Thou sayest me as queen and woman, not merely a crown. It is unprecedented." Her lips curved, a rare, genuine smile. "As is all of this." The doors parted again, admitting Lena and Holt, who froze at the sight of Marika seated so close, her hand still on Kieran's. "Forgive the intrusion, Majesty," Holt said smoothly. "We can return later." "No need," Marika replied, rising with fluid grace, though her fingers lingered on Kieran's a moment longer. "I have council matters to attend. We shall continue this anon, consort." The title carried a new weight, a promise, not just a duty. As she departed, Lena raised an eyebrow, her voice low. "Diplomat or consort speaking there?" "Both," Kieran said, his smile widening. "And I don't see a conflict." Beyond the chamber's walls, the plasma seas stretched toward the horizon, their glow a testament to the world he'd chosen. The conspiracy was quelled, the alliance secured, but it was the bond with Marika, forged in combat, tempered in trust, that anchored him now. Tomorrow would bring new battles, council debates, interstellar politics. But today, in the quiet aftermath, Kieran looked forward to facing them as the consort he'd become, not by accident, but by choice.